All right, so Sam and Lisa purchased a home together 2 months after they were married. So when I'm reading that, I need to condition myself to stop right there because I just got a very important piece of information. They purchased it when? After they were married. So what do we know about that purchase? It has to be what kind of concurrent ownership? Tenancy by the entirety. Because the only way a married couple can take title, remember married couples can hold title in any possible way because we don't really know when they bought it. The key is, were they married when they bought it? Don't be so closed-minded to think that just because they're married it has to be tenancy by the entirety because you don't know when they bought it. But in this case, we know that they bought it when they were what? Married, which means it is definitely tenancy by the entirety. Is everybody okay with that? What type of ownership is tenancy by the entirety? What percentage of ownership does each one have? Well, in tenancy by the entirety, what percentage of ownership is it always going to be? It's going to be 50-50, right? It's going to be a 50-50 split. So we know this is tenancy by the entirety, and we know that this is a 50-50 split. While we're talking about it, what else do we know about tenancy by the entirety? What's the key thing? Well, what is always present with tenancy by the entirety? The right of survivorship, right? And remember, the right of survivorship simply means that if one owner of a property dies, then any other surviving owners who have that right of survivorship would automatically absorb that owner's ownership. Now, in the case of a marriage, where there's only how many owners? 2. So that means as soon as one dies, the other's going to have what percentage of the ownership? 100%. That's very different than leaving it to them in a will. You need to understand that in your brain. That needs to sink in. Survivorship is much stronger than a will. It's not the same thing. Number one, survivorship overrides a will. Does that make sense for you guys? And that's going to be important in the test because it's going to try to talk you out of understanding what survivorship is. Survivorship happens instantly. Wills take a lot of time. Well, if the survivorship happens instantly, then you're going to do what the survivorship says because it's already happened. It has to happen instantly. In the case of a married couple, what that means is how many surviving spouses are there going to be if one dies? Just one, so they're going to have all 100% of the ownership. What if Sam had a will that said all of his stuff goes to his kids? Is that going to change this at all? No, and that's the key thing to understanding the right of survivorship, is that a will simply is not going to matter. That's an important thing in the real world. You have people who are on second marriages sometimes, and maybe they own property and they want their half, they own it with their spouse, and they want their half to go to their children that might be from a previous relationship. Does that make sense? That is not what's going to happen, though. What is going to happen if they die? It's going to go where? It's going to go to their spouse, and then when their spouse dies, it's going to go to whomever the spouse has named as heirs, which might be their kids, or it might be somebody else. Heck, it might even be new spouse. You never know. So you have to understand how that survivorship works. It overrides the will. What's the other thing we know about tenancy by the entirety? We know that you cannot do what? You can't sell without the permission of who? Of the other party. You got to have both parties' permission in order to sell. So one spouse can't sell their half without the other spouse's permission. We know that about tenancy by the entirety. Good. Good. That's why it's important to talk about these things. Okay? So, my computer's just not happy today. All kinds of the markings are not scrolling. Let me do this. Let me close all of these. I apologize. Let me close these and restart Word and see if that helps. Alright, there we go. Now let's see what we got. Hopefully it'll be better. Alright, there we go. Number 2, in the above question, this is a second marriage for Sam. He has a will that states his children will get all of his assets upon his death. What does this do to the status of the ownership if Sam were to die before Lisa? Well, we just talked about that. What does it do to the status of the ownership? It does absolutely nothing, right? The will has no impact. So, if Sam were to die, the best way to say what's going to happen is just to say, Lisa gets it. All. She's going to own the whole thing. Does that make sense? No matter what his will says. No matter what the will says, Lisa's going to own it all because of the survivorship. Number 3, Brad, Sally, and Kevin purchased a 20-acre property together without specifying the type of ownership they would like to have. Brad owns 50% of the total property with Sally, and Kevin each having 25% of the total. Based on this information, what would be the legal status of the ownership if Sally were to die? Well, first of all, are Brad, Sally, and Kevin all married to each other? No. That's always the first question you ask yourself when you're talking about concurrent ownership. Are they married? In this case, we know they're not married. So unmarried people who don't specify the type of ownership they want, what are they going to get? What's the default? Tenancy in common is the default. If you're unmarried and you do not specify, you're getting tenancy in common. That is the most basic form. That is what you get when you don't ask for something else. See, that's the key to know it, to understanding. You have to understand your tenants in common if you're unmarried, unless you specifically ask for something else. And what's the only thing you can ask for specifically other than tenancy in common? What can you ask for? Joint tenancy. But it says here, without specifying the type of ownership. So we know that's going to be tenancy in common, right there. That makes it tenancy in common. The other thing that makes it tenancy in common, look at the ownership shares. What are they? They are unequal, different. That's a tenancy in common thing. Because if it was joint tenancy, they would be what type, what shares of ownership? They would be equal ownership shares. So that's another clue that we've got tenancy in common here. So here's what we have. I always kind of draw it as a pie chart, which just represents 100% of the ownership. What we know is that Brad has 50%. This is Brad. And then we have the other two, Sally and Kevin, each owning 25%. Right? And they are what with each other? What's their relationship? Tenants in what? Tenants in common. Every one of them is a tenant in common with the other. And so what do they tell us happens now? What will be the legal status of the ownership if Sally were to what? Die. If Sally dies. Well, if Sally dies, where is her ownership share going to go? No. Not to Brad and Kevin. That's where you haven't, and that's why we go through these. Tenancy in common doesn't have what present? Ever. Survivorship. There is no right of survivorship. So if there's no right of survivorship, it does not go to the other owners. Who does it go to? Her heirs. So the status of the ownership is that Brad is going to continue to own his 50%, Kevin's going to continue to own his 25%, but this 25% is going to go to Sally's heirs. Does that make sense? And it's okay if you get it wrong. That's why we go through them. Because there is a vast difference between trying to memorize this stuff and applying it. They are two very different things. This is an application thing. Memorizing these rules only gets you about 10% of the way there. The rest, the other 90%, is application, is actually thinking about what this means. See, as soon as you see tenancy in common, the first thing you should say is no survivorship. Because that's the key aspect of tenancy in common, is that there's no survivorship. It's the most important thing. When you see tenancy by the entirety, you should automatically go what? Survivorship. When you see joint tenancy, you should say what? Survivorship. Joint tenancy is just survivorship with unmarried people, tenancy by the entirety, survivorship with a married couple. Alright? Number 4 says Thomas, Jeff, and George all purchased property together as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. The 100-acre parcel of land is a hunting preserve in Edgecombe County. Jeff has decided to sell his ownership interest to Samantha. What's the legal status of the ownership? Well, again, I'm going to draw myself a picture. They're joint tenants, so what do we know about their shares? They are what? Equal. They are equal ownership shares. Good. So we're dividing that thing into thirds. And we've got Jeff, Thomas, and George. Now what did it say their relationship with each other is? All the way around. They are joint tenants. And it's important that you show it in 3 separate places, folks, because can that relationship change at any given point? Yes, so you need to see how it intersects with each other. It's joint tenancy between John and George, or Jeff and George. It's joint tenancy between Thomas and George. It's joint tenancy between Thomas and Jeff. So you need to do it at every spot. It's joint tenancy all the way around. What do we know if we've got joint tenancy? There is survivorship. Okay? Jeff has decided to sell his ownership interest to Samantha. First of all, can Jeff do that?
Yes.
Yes, he can. Because what's the only form of ownership where you can't sell? Tenancy by the entirety. So Jeff can certainly sell, and he sells it to Samantha. Now Samantha comes in, what percentage is she going to own? She's going to own what Jeff owned, right? So that his third is now sold to her. Is she going to be a joint tenant with Thomas and with George? No, she's going to be what? A tenant in common. Why does she have to be a tenant in common? She did not purchase at the same time as the others. Remember, one of the rules of joint tenancy is the only way you can be a joint tenant is that all the joint tenants must have purchased at the same time. Because she came in at a different time, she's not going to be a joint tenant. She is going to be a tenant in common. Does that make sense for everybody? Now what that means is she's not going to have the benefit of one important right. What does she lose? What does she not have the benefit of? Survivorship. How about Thomas and George? Do they still have the benefit of survivorship? They do, because they remain joint tenants. So this is what our ownership looks like at this point. Now number 5 says, in the above question, what would be the legal status of the ownership if Thomas were to die after the sale of Jeff's portion to Samantha? So Thomas has died on us. Here's what that looks like. Thomas just evaporates, right? Essentially. And what also evaporates is his share of the ownership, because it goes to the other surviving owners who still have the benefit of what? Survivorship. And who is that in this case? George. And only George. So is Samantha going to get any benefit from Thomas dying? Nope. Her share stays exactly the same. Is George going to get some benefit from Thomas dying? Yeah, because he's going to take over Thomas's share. So at this point, how much does George own? 2/3. How much does Samantha own? 1/3. And they are what with each other? Tenants in common. That's the status of the ownership at that point in time. Yes, sir.
Question. If we get the purchase at the same time, you say you got a brother, you got a brother, kind of thing. If we purchase at the same time, the two of us join.
And one has tenants in common? Yes, theoretically you can. The first question was, if there are 3 purchasers at one time and 2 of them want to be joint tenants, but the third does not, could that be possible? And the answer is yes. Essentially, you can set up your ownership interest the way you want to. It would even theoretically be possible for Samantha to have come in as a joint tenant. Because what does the rule about joint tenancy say? You almost have what? purchased at the same time, couldn't George and John sell their shares to themselves? Couldn't they? If they wanted to allow Samantha to come in and still have the benefit of survivorship, they could sell their shares to themselves, and at that point, would Samantha have bought at the same time as them? And so they could possibly be joint tenants. They didn't tell us any of that happened, so we have to assume she comes in as a tenant in common. But you see how you can accomplish most anything you want to, with the exception of if you're married. If you're married, all bets are off. It's going to be tenancy by the entirety, whether you want it or not. It's just the way it works. And separated is still married. You know, you're going to run across in your career, I guarantee you, you're going to have somebody who's been separated for 20 years. And they never bothered to go file divorce paperwork. And they never bothered to finalize the divorce. They just went their separate ways. And 10 years later, she bought a house. And now she wants to do what with it? Sell it. Guess who owns half of it? Her husband. And people say, well, he's not her husband. They've been separated. Yes, he is her husband. As far as the state of North Carolina goes, and as far as the state of North Carolina goes, that means they are tenants by the what? Entirety, which means not only does he own half of it, she can't sell any of it without his what? Written permission. He's got to sign that deed. And I guarantee you he's not going to sign it for free. So that's a very big deal. Okay? Everybody good on that? Okay? Good. All right. Does that help going over those? Yeah, same.
So in that same scenario, having somebody who's married, married couple, the husband can't go and purchase, let's say, commercial property and be a joint tenant with, or a tenant in common with another client or partner.
So can you avoid tenancy by the entirety? Is that what your question is?
Pretty much.
Okay. So can I avoid tenancy by the entirety? Can I strip my spouse of their marital rights? That's the question you're ultimately asking. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but that's the way you have to look at it, because that's the way the state looks at it. The state looks at it as the marriage entitles that spouse to that ownership. So the only way for them not to have that ownership is to strip them of that entitlement. Well, the thing of it is, you can't strip them of that entitlement. They can strip themselves of it. They can voluntarily give up their marital interest in the property, but they have to do it in advance of purchasing the property. It's called a free trader agreement. You don't need to write that down. You don't need any notes. It's not going to be tested. But it is possible for a spouse to essentially say, I understand that I should have legal ownership of this property, and I understand that my spouse is going to be purchasing this property, but I want to allow them to purchase it by themselves, and I am giving up my legal right in the property. It's called a free trader agreement. And so it has to be executed even before you would make an offer on the property. So basically you'd have to sit down with your spouse, explain to your spouse what you're trying to accomplish. The two of you would have to go to an attorney. An attorney would have to explain the legal rights to the spouse and what they were sacrificing, and then the agreement would be drafted, the spouse would sign it, it would be notarized, and it has to be recorded in the county courthouse, so it becomes public knowledge that the spouse gave this permission to, because when you record something in the county courthouse, who has access to see it? Everybody. So not only do you have to execute it, it's got to be recorded and become public knowledge that essentially Sammy wanted to buy property without his wife owning it, and she was okay with that. So it is a very involved process. I mean, and it's meant to be. People say, why is that so hard to do? Because the idea of tenancy by the entirety was to prevent that very thing from happening. So the process to override it is very complex. That help?
Yeah.
So that's what you have to do. And I have had that happen once or twice in my career in divorce situations. You know, generally speaking, it's easier to get it accomplished in a divorce where both of them want to buy something else. You know, if they both have they're in the divorce process, but the divorce is not final, and they both want to purchase new properties, so that they both need a free trader agreement. You know, neither one wants the other to have an ownership interest in their new property. You can get it done then because they're sort of trading something. You know, you sign mine, I'll sign yours type thing. Where you run into problems is when you have one who wants to accomplish that thing, because like everything in most divorces, it becomes very contentious. It becomes like a point of negotiation. Well, I'll sign that if you offer me this, and then it just falls into the muck of the fighting of a divorce. So they're very hard to come by. Most often you just have to wait for the divorce. Most often. But yeah, if you had a business partner and you wanted to go into that with the business partner and you didn't want to have a spouse to have an ownership interest, that might be a time to do a free trade agreement even when they were going to continue to be married. But it's certainly not something you can do on the slide. They're gonna have about 10 people along the way telling them, you understand you are legally giving up your rights that your marriage entitles you to. I mean, people are going to really caution them against it. And so they're going to know what they're doing. All right, let's take a look then at the quiz that you took home, which was chapters 1 through 3. All right, chapters 1 through 3 quiz. First of all, did you notice a difference in my questions versus the book questions? Is there a difference in the level of the way the questions are asked? You should pay attention to that, because I often have people come to me and say, oh, well, I'm getting like 80% of the questions right at the end of the chapters. And I look at them and I say, then you're a long ways away. Because, in order to be really ready with this material, you should be getting almost every question correct at the end of the chapters, because those are very straightforward, just asking you the material questions. Mine are much more the application type questions that you could expect to see on the final exam. So, a whole other layer of level of difficulty. One of the things I'm going to do as we go through these kind of things is try to teach you some test-taking strategy, try to teach you how to answer these questions. Now, some of the questions are going to be, which of the following is the best answer? And those are tough because there might be 2 or 3 correct answers and one of them is better. We'll talk about those as we get to it. But then many of them are what I call the true-false questions, where 3 of the statements, the answers are going to be true and 1 is false. Or 3 of the answers are going to be false and 1 is going to be true. The good news for you is you don't care which way it is. The answer you're looking for is always the one that stands out. If 3 of the statements are true and 1's false, the answer is the false one. If 3 of the answers are false and 1's true, the answer is the true one. It's the one that's different than the others. What that helps tremendously with is the negative questions. Which of the following is not? All of the following except. Those are tough questions to answer because your brain is not, that is not the normal condition of the human brain to not answer a question. You want to answer the question, not answer the question. You see, it's hard to even say it, right? And that's the reason they do it to you on a test. The good news for you is, don't worry about it. If they say, which of the following is not a life estate, ignore the word not. They're asking you a question about life estates. So you just simply going to label them true, false. True, this is a life estate. True, this is a life estate. False, that's not a life estate. True, that's a life estate. Well, the answer is C, because it's the one that was different. The word not doesn't matter, okay? So that's a test-taking strategy to help avoid that. So look at number 1 here. It says, which of the following items is most likely to be considered a fixture in North Carolina and thus transfer with the sale of real property? What did we say a fixture was? Something that has been what? Permanently attached, and was permanently attached by who? By the owner of the real estate. Those are the 2 questions you have to ask yourself. And what was our definition of permanent attachment? Is it nailed, screwed, glued, or what? Buried in the ground. That was the list of things that would make it permanently attached. So we're asking us which one's a fixture. Number 1, an award-winning rose bush planted by the seller after winning a horticulture contest at the North Carolina State Fair. Is it permanently attached? Yes. It's buried in the what? Ground. Was it attached by the owner of the real estate? Yes. If I get 2 yeses, what is it most likely going to be? It's a fixture. The only thing that I would maybe go one step further with, this is a plant. And with plants, you need to ask yourself one more question. What about plants is different? Are there two different categories of plants?
Yes.
Ones that require what?
Uh,
Cultivation is too fancy of a word. What does that mean? It means I got to redo it every year. I got to replant it every year, right? Or ones that don't require replanting. If it requires replanting every year, is it a fixture or is it personal property? It's personal property. If it doesn't require replanting every year, then it is a what? Fixture. So, does this one require replanting every year? It does not. So what do we got here? Fixture or personal property? Fixture. I'll just write fixture. We'll put F and P. Fixture or personal. Okay? Number 2, a Japanese maple tree and a concrete planter that has been located to the left of the stairs approaching the front porch. Could I have stopped right here in a what? Concrete planter. Is it permanently attached? No, it is not. The rest of doesn't matter. Because if it's not permanently attached, it's what kind of property? Personal property. So we're going to put P. That's personal property. Number 3, custom draperies that were hand sewn to match the wallpaper in the dining room of a new construction model home. Could I have stopped at draperies? Are draperies permanently attached? They are not, so that's what kind of property? Personal property. Number 4, an ornamental mailbox nailed by Mrs. Smith to the side of the home she has leased for 8 years in Garner. Is it permanently attached? Yes, it is permanently attached. But was it permanently attached by the owner of the real property? No. So is it a fixture or is it personal property? That is personal property. So what's our answer going to be here? Number 1. By the way, I hate this 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's what the state uses, so I'm trying to get you used to it. They went away from A, B, C, D and did 1, 2, 3, 4. I hate it. It's okay when you get to like number 86, because it's easy to say number 86 is 3, but it sucks when you're going number 2 is 1. You're like, what is that? What? So I apologize in advance, but it's not my idea. Number 2, which of the following is not an inheritable freehold estate? Which of the following is not an inheritable freehold estate? So, freehold just means what? Ownership. So, which of the following is not inheritable ownership? That's the way you read that. You just substitute the word ownership for freehold. Which of the following is not inheritable as ownership? Which one is it? There's only one type of ownership that's not inheritable. And which one is it? A conventional life estate. Conventional life estate is not inheritable. That is one of the few things I just recommend you memorize, because it's easy to remember. It's the only one, right? Every other type of ownership is inheritable except a conventional life estate. One of the few times I say just memorize it. All right, number 3. Bob, Mary, and Jonathan purchased a 15-acre industrial development together as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. Mary has had some financial difficulties and is forced to sell her interest in the property to ABC Real Estate Holdings. Which of the following statements is correct regarding the transfer and the current state of ownership of the development? So, before we even look at the answers, because one of the classic mistakes that people make on these tests is they look to the test maker to give them the answer, right? They just, as soon as they read the question, they immediately start reading the answers before they even think about and formulate an answer in their head. Can I not go ahead and draw this out based on what they gave me and then find an answer that matches what I've drawn? Does that make sense for you guys? Don't take their word for it, because guess what? They're experts at talking you out of what you think you know. Whereas if you answer it for yourself first. So Bob, Mary, and Jonathan purchased it together as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. So what do I know about the ownership shares? They are what? Equal, because of the joint tenancy. So I'm going to divide this thing into thirds. We've got Bob, Mary, and Jonathan, I think it was, right? As joint tenants. So we got joint tenancy all around with the right of survivorship. And it said that Mary has had some financial difficulties and is forced to sell her interest in the property. Can Mary do that?
Yes.
Yep. So she sells to ABC. What does that do to the joint tenancy between Mary and the other parties? It turns it into what? Tenancy in common. How about Bob and Jonathan? They still remain what? Joint tenants. Is that a pretty good picture of what they describe to us? Right there. So we know that Bob and Jonathan still each own their 1/3 share. We know that ABC Real Estate owns a 1/3 share. We know that Bob and Jonathan are joint tenants, and we know that ABC is a what? Tenant in common. So we're looking for answer choices that line up with that. Bob and Jonathan own their 10-acre portion. Can I stop right there? Is that a true statement or a false statement? That's a false statement. There's no such thing as a 10-acre portion here. That is one of the classic, right there, gotchas. I threw out the bear trap and he looked at it, stared at it, and went, damn, that hurts. There's no such thing as a 10-acre portion. How big's the piece of land? 15 acres. You don't subdivide it. You don't go to put a piece of tape down on the ground and say, this is your 5 acres and here's my 5 acres and here. That's not the way it works. What they own is a portion of the 15-acre whole. Does that make sense for everybody? So that's a false statement right there. Doesn't matter what they say the rest of the way, that statement itself is false because they don't own their 10-acre portion because there is no 10-acre portion. What they own is 1/3 of the 15-acre total. Okay? Number 2, the transfer to ABC Real Estate Holdings is invalid because joint tenants cannot individually transfer their ownership interest. True or false? False. The rest of it doesn't matter because they right out of the gate, they gave us a false statement. Joint tenants can always transfer their interest. Number 3, Bob, Jonathan, and ABC Real Estate Holdings will own the 15-acre development as tenants in common with no further right of survivorship. True or false? False, because 2 of them do still have the right of survivorship and joint tenancy. We better hope number 4 is what? We better hope it is. Bob, Jonathan, and ABC Real Estate Holdings will own the 15-acre development concurrently with Bob and Jonathan being joint tenants with each other and ABC Holdings being a tenant in common. That is a true statement. And so I don't need to know whether they were asking me for the true or false when I can look at it and say, well, there's only one that's different, so the answer is number 4. Number 4. Right there. All right. Number 4. Companies granted ownership of a property for a defined amount of time with a deed that also includes provisions for a charity to obtain future ownership of the property. Which of the following best describes this freehold interest or this ownership interest? Well, this is very similar to the game we played with the cards the other day, right? Whenever we're trying to decide what type of ownership somebody has, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, did the grantor place any restrictions on the ownership? What's the answer to that question here? Did the grantor restrict this ownership in any way? How did they restrict it? Did they restrict time or use? Time. So it's not fee simple absolute because there's a restriction. If it's a restriction of time, then what kind of ownership is it? Some type of a life estate. So right there we've narrowed it down to either number what? 2 or number 3. 2 or 3. It's some type of life estate. The only other thing they told us is that there was a provision for a charity to obtain future ownership of the property. There is a provision. There's a provision for a charity. You would think somebody talk that loud in the hallway. Still. Gosh, am I wearing a microphone for her to have heard that out there? I've often been known as a lot of things. Subtle is not one of them. So, if you know it's a life estate, you start looking for things like, okay, well, is it a conventional life estate or is it a life estate per attribute? Well, they didn't tell us enough to know that here. Because they didn't tell us who the measuring life is. Notice, they told us the life tenant, Connie, is the life tenant, but they didn't tell us who the measuring life is. So we can't figure out if it's conventional or per attribute. But they did tell us that there was a provision that it would go to a charity in the future. Is that reverting back where it came from, or is that a remainder interest? So what we're looking for, all we know is it's some type of life estate with a remainder interest. How many answer choices have that in there? 1. Because I've had people with this question go, well, how do you know it's a life estate per attribute? I don't. But I do know it's a life estate, and I do know it has a remainder interest, and I know there's only one answer that has those two things in it. Does that make sense for you guys? For all I know, it could be a conventional life estate with a remainder interest. But I know it's not conventional with a reversionary interest. And so it can't, that eliminates number 2. The only one I'm left with is number 3.
So they don't really give you a right answer, it's just like a least wrong answer?
Well, you don't know that it's right or wrong, but it's the only one that it could possibly be. It's the only possibility, right? It could be a conventional life estate with a remainder interest, but it could not be fee simple absolute. It could not be fee simple determinable, and it could not be a conventional life estate with a reversionary interest. So, to answer your question, they don't give me enough information to know exactly what it is, but they give me enough information to eliminate the other 3. All right, number 5. Karen and Tom purchased 123 Main Street together while they were engaged to be married, which is a fancy way of saying they were what? Single. They were single. They were later married and lived in the home for 6 years. Now they have decided to purchase a second home on the coast in Atlantic Beach. Which of the following is untrue regarding their legal status? I kind of like to do a timeline here. So we've got some points on this timeline. We've got 123 Main Street, where they bought it. And we've got the Atlantic Beach home. Was there something that happened in the middle of all that? They got married. So, see, that gives me a very vivid, visual sort of break. What do I know for sure, just looking at that timeline? And I'll give you a hint, it has to do with the Atlantic Beach property. What do I know for sure? Tenants by the entirety. I know that for sure. Here's the thing, I don't know anything about 123 Main Street. I know that when they bought it, it was not tenancy by the entirety. Are you with me on that? But could it now be tenancy by the entirety? Could it?
Yes.
It's possible because they could have done what? They could have changed it. They could have redeeded it to themselves. So here's the thing. I got nothing to go on with 123 Main Street. The only thing I know for certain is that the Atlantic Beach property is what? Tenancy by the entirety. I've done all of that work before I even start looking at their answer choices. Because then I'm not worried about them talking me out of something. Number 1 says, Karen and Tom will own the Atlantic Beach home as tenants by the entirety. Is that a true statement? That is. True. Number 2, the property at 123 Main Street could be owned concurrently by Karen and Tom as any of tenants in common, joint tenants, or tenants by the entirety. True or false? True. That is a true statement. See, again, you have your mind too closed on this tenancy by the entirety thing. Tenancy by the entirety does not mean anytime you're married, it's tenancy by the entirety, and anytime you're not married, it's not tenancy by the entirety. Tenancy by the entirety means you were married when you purchased the property, or you have gotten married since and you redeeded it to yourself and changed it. Now that change does not happen automatically, right? If that change happened automatically, they would both be what? Both properties would be tenancy by the entirety. But that change doesn't happen automatically. Is the change possible? So that opens up tenancy by the entirety for 123 Main. It also could be whatever it was when they first bought it. And what way could they have first bought it, or what ways could they have first bought it? A joint tenancy or tenancy in common. So what does that leave as a possibility for 123? Everything, right? It's wide open. So that's a true statement. True statement. Number 3, Karen may elect to sell her interest in the Atlantic Beach property individually, provided she only conveys 50% ownership to the purchaser. Atlantic Beach is tenancy by the entirety, right? Can she sell her 50% ownership individually? No, she can't do anything individually with that property. That's a false statement. And then number 4, the home at 123 Main Street could have been purchased with unequal ownership shares. Could it have been? Yeah, because they were what when they purchased it? Not married. And so therefore they could have done tenancy in common with unequal ownership. That's true. So what's our answer? Number 3. I find that that's a tough question for people, and that's why I put it on there. because the tenancy by the entirety thing is a hang-up for folks. It is, you want it to be like strict rule. It doesn't work that way. People can do what they want to do. When we say that they were married when they purchased it, purchase is a very loose word. Because can I repurchase my house today if I choose to? Yeah, right now, I own my house as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. That's how we own the house. We own it as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. Could I turn it into tenancy in common today if I wanted to? Sure I could. I could simply sell my half to myself. I don't even need the other person. Because if I sell my half to myself as a tenant in common, well, there's only one other owner, so what does he have to be with me? A tenant in common. Does that make sense for everybody? Simple, straightforward, easy. So, you can change. Could I change the tenancy by the entirety? I suppose I could, but I ain't going that far. It's possible, you know. It would require significant other undertakings on my. I'm not going to do that. So, but you see, you can change them. The one you can't change is when you are tenancy by the entirety. There's no getting out of. You can get into it voluntarily, but you can't get out of it without their permission. That's the thing. Getting in is easiest. The getting out is hard with tenancy by the entirety. Okay? Number 6. Elmer has inherited a vacant lot in Greensboro in which the grantor has stated that the property may not be used for the purpose of developing a manufactured home park. Which of the following best describes this type of ownership? So again, we're back to the card game. Is the grantor limiting either time or use? They're limiting something, so it's not fee simple absolute. They're limiting use, so it's not a life estate. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? So it's not a life estate. It's not fee simple absolute. We've eliminated 2 of them right there. Limitations of use are fee simple subject to a condition and fee simple determinable. Has the grantor told Elmer what he can do or what he cannot do? Cannot do. They said the property may not be used for the purposes of developing a mobile home park. Is that determinable or subject to a condition? That's subject to a condition. Good. Good. Subject to a condition. Number 7 says Barney's purchased the home located at 555 Oak Street in Raleigh, utilizing the standard offer to purchase and contracts applied by the North Carolina Association of Realtors. When the home was listed by the sellers, they instructed their listing broker that the chandelier in the dining room was not going to convey with the property because it belonged to the maternal grandmother and had sentimental value. Barney's purchase contract made no specific mention of the chandelier. Which of the following statements is true regarding the status? Again, before I even read an answer choice, let's talk about a chandelier. Is a chandelier a fixture? Yes, it's permanently attached, and it was permanently attached in this case by the owner of the real estate. It's a fixture. Are fixtures part of the sale?
Yes.
Yes, they are. So, generally speaking, if the property's sold, what happens with the fixture? It goes with the property, so it conveys from seller to buyer as part of the sale. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, Barney made it clear that he did not want that to happen, but who did he make it clear to? His who? His agent. Who did he not make it clear to? The buyer. Because the only document that exists between the buyer and the seller is the sales contract. And what does it say that this sales contract says about the chandelier? It makes no mention. So if a sales contract makes no mention of a fixture, what happens to the fixture? It's sold with the property. So what is the legal status of the ownership of the chandelier? Whose is it? The sellers or the buyers? It's the buyer's chandelier. That's it. All the rest is fluff. The chandelier belongs to the buyer. And so that's what I'm looking for in the answer choice. It says the chandelier is a fixture and thus must be accepted in the sales contract if it will not convey. Yes, sir.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I borrowed Tina out here for about 15 minutes. You here?
Do I need Tina?
Yeah, she's here to, I guess.
No, she's here for your class.
Oh, for my class?
Yeah, she's here. You can borrow all you want to, because she's here for your class, not mine. So,
Okay, I did not know that, but it's all right out here.
yep, she's for you. There you go.
Thank you.
know?
Yeah.
All right. Is number 1 a true statement?
Yes.
Yeah. Number one's true. How about the highlighter's not working as it can. Number two, the chandelier will remain the personal property of the sellers because they've given their broker a lawful command that it should not convey with the sale. Is that a true statement or a false statement? It's false. You know, yes, the broker obviously screwed up, and yes, they're going to have a mad client. Yes, they could be sued, and yes, they could be disciplined, but none of that impacts the actual transaction. Contract doesn't say anything, then the chandelier was sold. Number three, Barney must complete a separate bill of sale for the chandelier. Is that true or false? That's false. He doesn't need a separate bill of sale. He already bought it with the house. And number four, the chandelier must be removed by the sellers prior to closing and a new fixture installed if they wish for it to remain their personal property. What's wrong with that statement? When should it be removed? Before the showing. That's exactly right. Before the buyer looks at the property and makes an offer. It should be removed prior to showing. So that makes that a false statement, which leaves the only true one as number one, and that is our answer. Number 8, which of the following would not be considered an appurtenance to a parcel of real estate? An appurtenance. Number 1, a crop of corn. I can stop right there. Crops are what kind of property? They are personal property, so that is definitely not an appurtenance. I'm just going to put NA, not appurtenant. Number 2, oil and gas rights. Can I stop right there? See, here's the thing. The rest of that is verbal fluff. Are oil and gas rights appurtenances? Are they? Yes, they are. Whether they've been sold or not, they're still appurtenances. That's an appurtenance. Number 3, a warehouse constructed on a parcel of commercial property. Is that an appurtenance?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Number 4, covenants or restrictions imposed by the homeowners association. Are covenants an appurtenance? Yes, they are. So what's our answer here? Number 1. See, the one that I find that people struggle with, and you need to be honest with yourself if it threw you for a loop at all. Number 2, oil and gas rights that have been sold. Because you want to think of, well, if they've been sold, it can't be appurtenant anymore. Oil and gas rights are always appurtenant. Just like water rights are always appurtenant. Just like any rights are always appurtenant. Who they belong to as a person doesn't matter. The rights are still attached to the property. Does that make sense for everybody? Two different people may own the property and the right, but the right itself belongs to the property. It's always attached to the property. It's always an appurtenance. Number 9. Which of the following is untrue regarding the North Carolina Condominium Act of 1986? Well, talk to me about the North Carolina Condominium Act. What condos does it apply to? New construction. New construction condos. So number 1, under the Act, the purchasers of all residential condominiums are afforded a right of rescission for a statutorily determined length of time. That sounds real good, but it's what? That's a false statement. What makes it false? All. All. Because it's not all condos, it's only what? New condos. Number 2, should a purchaser of a new construction condo change their mind 6 days after contract signing, they can terminate with no penalty and receive a full refund of all fees and deposits. True or false? True. That's what a right of rescission is. A right of rescission is the right to do what? Change your mind and get all of your money back without penalty. And how many days do they have to make that change of mind? 7 days if it is a what? New construction condo. Okay, Christine? That's the purpose of the law, is to give you the right to change your mind and get all your money back. But only if it's new. Only if it's new. Okay? Number 3, the Act does not apply to all condominium purchases. True or false? True. And then number 4, resale condominiums of any type are exempt from the protections of the Act. True or false? True. So what's our answer? Number 1. Number 1. All right, number 10. Which of the following statements regarding timeshares in North Carolina are true? So we're talking about timeshare. Give me the definition of a timeshare. Again, before you start reading their nonsense, talk to me about what you know about a timeshare. Give me the definition of a timeshare. What's a timeshare in North Carolina? If you're drawing a blank right there, you need to write in your notes. I don't know the definition of a timeshare because you're certainly going to see it on the test, 100%.
You have the right to use it for a certain length of time, some years.
Yeah, that is a timeshare in general. What is a timeshare in North Carolina, though? What does the North Carolina law say about timeshares?
5 times.
5 times over how many years?
5.
5 years. At least 5 times over the course of at least 5 years. So 5 or more time periods, 5 or more years. That's a timeshare in North Carolina. You've got to be able to fire that definition instantly because there's no way you can possibly, because I'm telling you, you see a timeshare question, it's not going to be generic. It's going to be North Carolina specific. So you've got to know the North Carolina definition of a timeshare. Okay? The purchase of 1 week per year every other year for a duration of 8 years would qualify as a timeshare. True or false? Is it at least 5 time periods and at least 5 years? It is?
It says every other year.
Every other year for 8 years. 4 time periods. It is not at least 5 time periods. So is that a true statement or a false statement? That's a false statement. False statement. Number 2. Timeshare purchasers are afforded a 7-day right of rescission to terminate the timeshare purchase agreement. True or false? That is what? False. They are given a right to change their mind. How long is that right? 5 days. Those are the kinds of nitpicky little things. You want to hear something ugly? There's only 40 questions on the state section of the exam. You just lost 2.5% of the whole class because you couldn't remember 5 days. When I'm telling you it's a North Carolina specific law, I understand I sound like the time frame Nazi because I have to be. They are going to, you're going to see that question. It may be almost literally verbatim, this kind of question. And you will still miss it because in the studying of things, you think you got it, but you don't got it when it comes to these time frames. Remember when I told you about condos? I said, oh, 7's going to be easy to remember right now because it's the only one we've got. But when you start adding them on, they get really hard to remember really quickly. You got to make yourself flashcards. You got to drill that down. As soon as you see timeshare, the number 5 ought to be like a neon flashing sign in your head because everything about timeshares is a what? Is a 5. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
And I think that they read to the piece that they have to keep the money in a trust account for, is it 7 or 10 days?
10 days.
10 days, yeah.
10 days. For twice as long as you have to change your mind. All the money sits in a trust account for 10 days with timeshare purchases. Okay? So that's a false statement. So, go back to the question. Which of the following is true? What's the answer to that question? Neither of them. Number 4. Neither of them is true. Teresa, did you have a question?
No.
Okay, I thought I saw your hand for a second. Okay, are we good on that? Make sure you go back and really hammer that definition of a timeshare. Number 11, Wake Heating and Air has installed a replacement HVAC system in the home at 785 Oak Street in Cary. Here's another way to condition yourself with a standardized test. You can't have 60,000 facts running around to answer these questions. See, right there you need to stop, take a deep breath, and say what this question is going to be about. Just with that one statement, what do you know this question is going to be about? It's going to be about what? Mechanics liens. There's nothing else. Why in the heck else would we be talking about a heating and air company, right? So you learn to filter it down because now you're only working in those few little things, because we only know 3 things about mechanics liens. So you got to narrow it down to those things. This is a mechanics lien question. In Cary, they began working on January 15th and completed their job on February 1st. Which of the following statements regarding mechanics liens is correct in North Carolina? All right, so talk to me about what you know about mechanics lien. Before I look at their choices, what do you know about mechanics lien? What date matters the most? The day they what? Finish work. Because that's when the clock starts to tick. And how many days are on the clock? 120. They have to do what within 120 days after they finish work, or the last time they provide work or material? They have to do what within 120 days if they want to? File the lien. What other clock is running? 180 days, right? Which is how long they have to enforce or exercise that lien, which would mean what? Foreclose on the property. Remember, it's not 120 plus 180. The clocks are running at the same time. So if they wait till day 120 to file the lien, how much longer do they have to actually foreclose on the property? 60 days. 60 days. Clocks are running concurrently at the same time. Okay? Wake Heating and Air should properly record their lien no later than 120 days after their January 15th commencement date. Is that a true statement or a false statement?
False.
False. It's not after their start date, but after their finish date. Number 2, should a landscaping company properly record on January 30th a mechanics lien for work begun on January 20th, that lien will take priority over any subsequent lien filed by Wake Heating and Air. I need to make myself a little timeline here. When did Wake Heating and Air start? January 15th, right? Okay. When did the landscaping company start? January 20th. So we got landscaper here and HVAC here. And then the landscape lien gets filed on January 30th. Lien for landscape. That's what we know about the timeline, right? And what it says is that any lien filed by the landscaping company would take priority. Priority means you go to the front of the line, right? Over any lien filed by Wake Heating and Air. How do we line them up? No matter when they're recorded, what order do they get in? How do they line up? The order in which they what? Not recorded, but started work. So who's going to be first in line to get paid here? HVAC. So is that statement true or is that statement false? That statement is false. Because it's actually going to be Wake HVAC that's going to have priority. Even if they file their lien after, they're going to have priority. Number 3, any action taken to enforce the lien of Wake Heating and Air must commence prior to the expiration of a 180-day period beginning on February 1. True or false? That is a true statement. That's a true statement. They got 180 days to enforce that lien, and that 180-day clock starts on the day they finish the job. So that's a true statement. And number 4, a valid mechanics lien cannot be established in this case because HVAC systems are not covered. That's false. So our answer is number 3. Oops. Number 3. All right, number 12 says the residential property is located in the city limits of Nightdale, where Wake County assesses a real property tax rate of 72 cents per 100, and Nightdale has an additional assessment of 30 cents per 100. If the property was assessed a market value of $285,000 during the last biennial reappraisal, what will the current year's tax bill be, rounded to the nearest dollar? So they're asking us for the tax bill. Our T-bar for tax bill looks like this. Tax bill on top, and on the bottom is what? Assessed value and rate. Okay? So, what I know about this is that the assessed value is $285,000. So that just goes right there. Okay? $285,000. What did they tell me about the rate? They gave me 2 of them, so what am I going to have to do with those? I'm going to have to add them together because the property is going to end up paying both of those. What do you get for a total tax rate? What's 32 cents plus 70 cents? $1.02, which is the same thing as 1.02 what? Percent. So the math is going to be $285,000 multiplied or divided? $285,000 times 1.02%, 2907, which is number 4. Okay. Number 13 says the assessed tax value of a property is $176,000 in Macomb County, Michigan, which uses 50% of the assessed value for taxation purposes and has a mill rate of 27. What's the annual property tax bill? So again, I write down my formula first. They want to know the tax bill. And the formula for that is assessed value times rate. What did they tell me about the assessed value? Let's deal with that piece first. The assessed value, did they give it to me? Sort of. They say it's 50% of $176,000, right? So that's $176,000. Now I don't want you to do this. Don't do $176,000 divided by 2. Get yourself out of that bad habit. Because if I had said 52%, what would you do? Sit there and scratch your head, not know what the hell to do, right? When I say 50% of something, that's 176,000 times 50%, right? So that's what we're going to type in the calculator, $176,000 times 50%. And what do we end up with? $88,000 for our assessed value. So we're halfway there. The other thing we need to know is the what? Is the rate. Now they gave it to us as a mill rate. We need to get rid of the mill rate. How do we get rid of a mill rate? Divide it by 1,000. Divide it by 1,000. To get rid of that mill rate, we want to divide it by 1,000. So we're going to come over here and we're going to do 27 divided by 1,000. And what do you get? 0.027, right? And that's your rate. So your math is just going to be 88,000 times 0.027. What do we end up with for a tax bill? $2,376. How's everybody feel about that one? That's about as complex as a property tax question could be on the exam, quite honestly, because you had to come up with the assessed value. You also had to convert out of a mill rate. So if you feel okay with that, then you're in pretty good shape on property tax math overall. If not, then we'll work on it. Number 14, which of the following statements is untrue regarding an easement in gross? So we talked about easements in chapter 3 the other day. There are 2 types of easements. What are the 2 main categories of easements? Easements in gross, and then what's the other? Appurtenant easements, okay? So again, if that's not quick for you, you need to go back. I need to study easements again. I need those 2 types of easements. It's going to become harder and harder to instant recall this stuff. So it's got to be instant. And remember, you're going to get more information today. So if you're already behind on the instant recall, that means you've got to work at it tougher. You've got to get there. Because it's going to get harder and harder to have that stuff on recall all the time. 2 main categories of easements. Easements in gross and appurtenant easements. What's the biggest difference between the 2? How long they what? How long they last. How long do appurtenant easements last? Forever. How long do easements in gross last? A long time. Specifically, how long though? Until who dies? The owner of the easement. Not the owner of the property. We don't care about the owner of the property. The owner of the easement, which is the person or company that has the right to use or access somebody else's property. So they're asking us here about an easement in gross. Easements in gross are the ones that go away when their owner dies. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, with appurtenant easements, how many properties are involved? With appurtenant easements, 2 properties. You have a servient property and a dominant property. How many properties are involved with an easement in gross? 1, 1,000,000, We don't know. Could be any number of them, right? Could we have an easement in gross that only impacts one property? Sure. Could we have an easement in gross that impacts 50 properties in a row? Sure. So we don't know anything about the number. Are there servient and dominant properties with easements in gross?
Yeah.
Where are the dominant ones?
The one that get the,
Hmm?
the one that get the benefit.
Oh, there's properties that get the benefit with an easement in gross? Who gets the benefit with an easement in gross? A person, not a piece of property. There's no dominant property involved with an easement in gross because there's no property giving a benefit. What is the status of the property with the easement in gross? It's always what? It's always servient because it's always being used. It's never getting advantage, it's always being taken advantage of with an easement in gross. Whereas with an appurtenant easement, one property is being taken advantage of and the other property is doing what? Getting the advantage. Okay? So, and that's why I say the key to these questions is not looking to them for the answers. Their job is to talk you out of the answer, not give you the answer. So when you see a question about easements, all of that needs to just sort of filter into your brain as best you possibly can. I know it's hard to discipline yourself because you're like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go. It's the worst way to take a test. The best way to take a test is which of the following is untrue about easements and gross. Stop right there. And for the next 30 seconds, you're not even going to look any further down the page. You're going to have an internal conversation of what I know about easements. Because here's the thing. If you don't know anything about easements, there's no need for you to read the answer choices anyway. You may as well just say, okay, 2. Because at that point, you're just guessing. You see what I'm saying? You need to stop. That's how you filter your thoughts down. Okay? Number 1, a properly recorded easement in gross can involve a single property or many contiguous properties to accomplish the goal of the easement holder. True or false? True. That's a true statement. Number 2, the beneficiary of the easement in gross is the dominant tenement. True or false? False. Who is the beneficiary of an easement in gross? Who benefits from it? The owner of the easement, not the owner of the property, the owner of the easement. And who is the owner of the easement? Who has these easements in gross? Utility company. Duke Power owns the easement. Duke Power is the beneficiary. There is no dominant tenement. The tenement is what? Dominant or servient? Servient. Always in an easement in gross. Always servient in an easement in gross. Okay? So that is a false statement. Number 3, a utility company who is the beneficiary of an easement in gross may transfer this easement to a subsequent beneficiary if the utility company is sold or absorbed. In other words, when Progress Energy was absorbed into Duke Power, did their easements go into Duke Power, the new Duke Power? Did they? You sure they did? Absolutely they did. They didn't lose all those easements. The only way that easement goes away is if what happens? If the beneficiary does what? Dies. Progress Energy didn't die, it just became part of a bigger thing. So the easements go on. That's a true statement. Number 4, personal easement in gross is not transferable. True or false? That is true. Personal easements in gross cannot be transferred. So if the beneficiary is a living person, it cannot be transferred. What's our answer there? Number 2. Based on that interaction we just had, every single one of you needs to be writing down. Go back and look at easements. You're going to see the questions. They're coming. You need to understand them. And if you don't, you need to ask questions about them. Okay? Because I don't know where your brain is on them. That's up to you. You got to take control of it. I'm happy to answer the questions, but you got to direct me. Yes, sir.
I understand it, but I don't understand it.
You understand it, but you don't understand it. Okay?
Dominant and servient.
Dominant and servient. All right? We talked about last week. Dividing, this is one big piece of land, this classroom. Except I own it and I want to subdivide it. Okay? I want to subdivide it into 4 pieces of land. Why am I most likely to subdivide it? What do I want to do with it once I subdivide it? sell the lots, right? In some form of, whether I'm building houses or selling the lots to somebody. But the whole reason to subdivide it is because you want to do what? You want to convey it. You want to sell it. Everybody with me on that? Here's the thing. Where's the highway? Where's the access to this property? Right there. Right? So now I've divided the property. Lot 1. Lot 2. Lot 3. Lot 4. Everybody with me on that? What is the immediate problem you see for lots 2, 3, and 4? They have no access to what? They can't get out. They are landlocked. What is the only way we can provide that access? With an easement. Where is the easement for lot that lot number 2 needs? Lot number 2 needs something. Would you agree with that? Where is the easement going to be that lot number 2 needs? Is it on lot number 2 or is it on lot number 1? It's on lot number 1. Lot number 2 needs to use a portion of lot number 1. Which one is the dominant tenement and which one is the servient tenement? Lot number 2 is what? Dominant, and lot number 1 is servient. Does that make sense? And so we would create an easement. Where's the easement going to be located? On lot number 1, lot number 2, or both? The easement is on lot number 1. This is the easement, right? And here's the thing. Does lot number 1 have the right to use any portion of lot number 2? Does lot number 2 have the right to use this portion of lot number 1? That's how you know that one's dominant and this one's servient. Does that make sense? This one dominates over this one. Now we have the same problem for lot number 3, don't we? Lot number 3 needs an easement on what lot? Just 2. Because the right to access lot number 1 already exists with the first easement. Does that make sense? So lot number 3 only needs access legally across which lot? Lot number 2. So which lot is using which one? 3 is using 2. So 3 is what? Dominant. 2 is servient. For this easement. That's separate from that easement. Because here's the thing. Once the person who lives on lot number 3 has the legal access to get across here, well, everybody who occupies this lot already has legal access to go across there. So would that include the people coming from lot number 3? See, this easement gives the effect of giving everybody from that point. Does that make sense? Does lot number 4 have a problem? Yeah. If they could get here, they'd be okay, right? But they can't get here unless they need to go across what? Lot number 3. So we need a third easement right here where lot number 4 is using lot number 3. So lot number 4 is what? Dominant, and lot number 3 is servient for this easement. So lot number 1, always dominant, always servient, or sometimes one, sometimes the other. Which is lot number 1? Always servient. Lot number 4, always dominant, always servient, or both? Always dominant. The 2 in the middle are what? Both. They're dominant for one easement and servient for the other, right? Lot number 3 is dominant over lot number 2, but servient to lot number 4. Lot number 2 is dominant over lot number 1, but servient to lot number 3. Does that make sense? So actually, from the standpoint of being least used, what's the best lot in the bunch?
4.
Lot number 4. Because lot number 4 has the most use of property of all of them. Because it gets to use not only their own property, which by the way nobody else can access, but this portion of everybody else's. Does that make sense? That help? Okay, good.
Let's put it into a question.
Yeah, oh, I get that. I get that.
I understand it
Okay.
within some.
Well, here's another easement question. Which of the following is correct regarding the legal status of appurtenant easements in North Carolina? An appurtenant easement is subject to the restrictions of the statute of frauds, but not covered under the Concurrent Act. Well, we haven't talked yet about the statute of frauds or the Concurrent Act, but if you bother to look them up, it said the statute of frauds says that certain documents have to be in writing to be enforceable. The Concurrent Act says that certain documents have to be recorded to be enforceable. I did say the other day in class, though, that easements have to be what? They have to be recorded. Because if you think about it, the whole purpose of recording something is to notify the public of its existence. Because the next buyer needs to know about it. If somebody's looking at buying lot number 3, don't they need to know that number 1, lot number 3's access to the road is via an easement across lot number 2? And don't they also need to know that they are giving an easement to lot number 4? So that's why these things have to be recorded. So number 1 is false because easements are actually covered under both. They must be in writing and they must be recorded. That's a false statement. Number 2 says that should the properties involved in the appurtenant easement be merged, the new owner shall have the option of keeping the easement or removing it. What did we say would happen if lot number 4 buys lot number 3? What's going to happen to this easement? It goes away. Remember, the basic definition of an easement is the right to use what? Someone else's property. So if lot numbers 4 and 3 are merged into one lot, I don't need the right to use someone else's property because it's what? It's my property. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? So that is false because there's not going to be an option there. The easement itself is located on a piece of property known as the servient tenement. Even if you didn't know the others, is that true or false right there? The easement is located on the servient tenement. That's what? That is true. Always. The easement is where the use happens. What's being used. Servient means being used, right? So that's a true statement. And then number 4, the dominant tenant will share in the cost burden of maintaining a shared driveway created by an appurtenant easement. Does the dominant tenant have to pay to maintain the easement? No, because where is the easement? It's on the servient. So whose job is it to maintain it? The servient's job. Now, here's the thing. In the real world, if you have something like a shared driveway, would it be smart when the easement was created to also create like a shared maintenance agreement? Absolutely. People say that to me all the time, that's not true. I had a shared driveway, we all had to pay. That's because there was a separate agreement for that. But if you create the easement and you don't create a separate agreement, who does it fall to maintain it? The servient or the dominant? The servient. The servient. Oh, it can be made later, but it never would be. Because here's the thing, you've asked me a real world question, I'm going to give you a real world response. Because you asked me, could it be created at a later time? Here's what it looks like to create at a later time. Teresa owns this lot over here, and the driveway is falling apart, and it needs to be repaved. So she comes to Sammy, who owns this lot over here, and says, look, you know, legally you don't have to pay for the driveway to be fixed. But I would like us to create a legal agreement where you can share in that expense. How do you feel about that? What is Sammy going to say? Hell no. And by the way, get on it, because I'm tired of driving through the potholes, and it's your legal responsibility. So the answer to your question is, of course it can be created later. The real answer to your question is people won't do that. Because if people think for 1 second they can get away without paying for something, they're most likely not going to pay for it. So when is the appropriate time to create that kind of an agreement? When you first create the easement. Part of the easement creation should be creating covenants that require some kind of a shared maintenance expense. Because that's the only way it's practically going to work. Does that make sense for everybody? That's the way you would want to do it. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. Okay? So the answer to that one is number 3. And that's it. That is it. How'd you do? How we doing there? If not so well, then obviously you need to go back and take a look at those items. And that's why we do the quizzes. It's not meant to be discouraging. It's not even really meant to be encouraging. It's meant to give you a barometer of where you stand. What I can tell you is the information only gets deeper and it only gets quicker. So if you're already struggling with, okay, I didn't do really well on this, you're behind. And but the good news is you're early enough in the class that you can catch up. 3 weeks from now, I will not say that. You will not hear me 2 weeks from now even say, oh, don't worry, you can catch up, because by then it's too late. So make sure you're staying on top of this. Make sure you're getting it as we go, okay? Because we're going to move on to something entirely different. And you don't have the opportunity anymore. All right, so let's do this. Let's take the first break. When we come back, we're going to look at chapter 4, okay? Yes, Sam?
Question. So,
Yep.
I was looking at this chart. Maybe should have gone to my packet, but
That's to convert it to a North Carolina rate.
so it's not to a rate.
You can convert it to a North Carolina rate as long as when you plug it in, you hit the percent button. Because a North